January 22, 1879. The eastern slope of Isandlwana, Zululand. Heat radiates from the parched African earth as Private Thomas Davis of the 24th Regiment of Foot adjusts the heavy brass buckle of his ammunition pouch. He squints against the blinding morning glare, his Martini-Henry rifle resting casually across his shoulder. To his back rises the sheer, sphinx-like rock face of Isandlwana Hill. Stretching out before him, the sprawling British encampment is a sea of white canvas tents, tethered horses, and grazing oxen, sitting completely exposed on the open plain. There are no trenches dug into the soil, no defensive wagons drawn into a protective circle. Brevet Lieutenant Colonel Henry Pouliane, left in command of the camp while Lord Chelmsford blindly hunts the main enemy force miles away, has deemed such rudimentary precautions entirely unnecessary. The general consensus among the British officer corps is absolute and unyielding. They are the vanguard of the most powerful military machine on the globe. Their opponents, the Zulu, are perceived as a disorganized mob, severely underarmed with little more than short spears and cowhide shields. The commanders arrogantly believe these indigenous warriors will inevitably break and scatter in terror at the very first disciplined volley of British lead. After all, the men of the 24th possess the Martini-Henry breech-loading rifle, a marvel of modern engineering capable of hurling heavy .45 caliber rounds with devastating precision. As the enlisted men casually boil their morning tea and the regimental band prepares to play, a sudden disturbance ripples through the northern picket line. A mounted colonial scout bursts through the perimeter, his horse heaving and foaming with exhaustion. He reins in violently outside the command tent, pointing a trembling hand toward the distant, rolling ridge of the Mabeso Heights. The scout does not speak of a minor skirmish or a retreating rabble. He gasps out a frantic, breathless warning, a warning of a dark, massive tide rising just beyond the horizon, sitting in absolute, disciplined silence within the deep ravines.
Usuthu! Ngadla ngesijula! Phambili! Bafana bami, sishaya namuhla!
Lieutenant Colonel Pouliane steps from his tent, brushing the dust from his tunic, his expression one of mild annoyance rather than genuine alarm. Still, military protocol dictates a response. Bugles shatter the morning calm, sounding the "stand to," Private Davis and his comrades abandon their boiling tea, grabbing their weapons and slotting heavy brass cartridges into the breeches. They form the legendary "thin red line," a single rank of scarlet tunics stretching nearly a mile across the rocky, uneven plain. It is a dangerously overextended formation, a fatal miscalculation born of supreme overconfidence in their own firepower. Then, the horizon turns black. Rising from the concealment of the Ngweni Valley is not a frantic, unorganized rabble, but the main striking force of the Zulu kingdom, over 20,000 seasoned warriors of King Cetshwayo's army. They move with a terrifying, synchronized precision, completely devoid of the chaotic clamor the British officers had so arrogantly predicted. The only sound sweeping across the savanna is a rhythmic, earth-shaking hiss, accompanied by the low, ominous thunder of thousands of short stabbing spears drumming against hardened oxhide shields. Without hesitation, the Zulu commanders unleash their devastating Impondo Zankamo, the horns of the buffalo tactical formation. The chest of the army, composed of heavily armed veteran regiments, charges directly into the teeth of the British firing line to absorb the impact. Simultaneously, the younger, faster warriors forming the left and right horns sprint incredibly wide in a sprawling arc, utilizing the undulating terrain and deep dongas to mask their flanking maneuvers. Fire, The British officers bark their commands. A blinding, synchronized sheet of yellow flame erupts across the plain. The Martini-Henry's roar, tearing massive, bloody gaps through the advancing Zulu chest. The sheer volume of high-velocity lead forces the central charge to stall, pinning the veterans behind the scant cover of scrub brush and shallow dry washes. For a fleeting, deceptive moment, Pouliane and his officers believe the modern firepower has done its job. But the horns are still running, silently closing the deadly embrace around the camp. Down on the firing line, the suffocating heat is suddenly matched by a creeping, unnatural darkness. As the battle reaches its fever pitch, a partial solar eclipse begins to swallow the sun, casting a sickly, copper-colored twilight over the blood-soaked savanna. Among the British ranks, the unrelenting roar of the Martini-Henrys begins to sputter and cough. Private Davis reaches desperately into his leather pouch, his soot-stained fingers grasping nothing but empty air. The fatal flaw of Poulien's overextended deployment is now brutally apparent. The firing line has been pushed too far forward, stretching nearly a mile from the main camp, where the reserve ammunition wagons sit. Quartermasters, paralyzed by rigid Victorian military regulations, initially refused to distribute heavy wooden crates of bullets to men outside their designated companies. Even as desperate runners arrive from the front, frantically demanding rounds, the agonizing delay in unscrewing the copper-banded boxes seals the fate of the 24th Regiment. As the rate of British fire slackens, the thick white clouds of gun smoke briefly clear, revealing a terrifying reality. The Zulu horns have successfully bypassed the flanks. The trap is shut. Sensing the drop in firepower, the veteran Zulu commanders in the center leap from the scrub brush with a deafening roar. Thousands of warriors surge forward, covering the final few hundred yards in a matter of seconds. The British infantrymen hastily fix their long triangular bayonets, bracing for the impact. But the disciplined red line is instantly shattered by the sheer kinetic weight of the charging mass. The battle devolves into a brutal, close-quarters slaughter. The long British bayonets are parried by the heavy oxhide shields, while the Zulu Ikilwa, a deadly, short-shafted stabbing spear, delivers devastating, underhand thrusts. Davis and his surviving comrades are forced into isolated, desperate squares, fighting back-to-back in the eerie, darkened dust storm as their camp is completely overrun. The isolated squares of redcoats rapidly dissolve into a chaotic, swirling melee. The Martini-Henrys, now useless as firearms, are desperately swung as heavy clubs until their wooden stocks splinter against the iron-hard Zulu shields. In the center of the disintegrating camp, surrounded by burning tents and dying mules, a final, frantic drama unfolds. Adjutant Tinmouth Melville, realizing the battle is entirely lost, spurs his horse through the collapsing lines. Clutched tightly against his chest is the heavy, gold-fringed silk of the 24th Regiment's Queen and Apos S color. Alongside Lieutenant Neville Coghill, he carves a bloody path toward the steep, rocky gorge of the Buffalo River, pursued relentlessly by fast-moving Zulu skirmishers. Both officers will bleed out on the jagged riverbanks, their bodies pierced by spears, though the silken flag they gave their lives for will miraculously wash downstream, saved from enemy hands. Back at the foot of Isandlwana, the slaughter reaches its grim, inevitable conclusion. By mid-afternoon, the unnatural eclipse lifts, returning the harsh African sun to a scene of unimaginable carnage. Over 1,300 British and colonial troops lie dead among the smashed wagons and scattered ammunition boxes. Their bodies are ritually disemboweled by the victorious warriors to release the spirits of the slain, a customary Zulu practice that terrifies the few fleeing survivors. When Lord Chelmsford's main column finally marches back to the campsite under the pitch-black cloak of nightfall, the air is thick with the stench of blood and burning canvas. His men stumble blindly over the mutilated corpses of their comrades in the dark. The arrogant illusion of European invincibility has been completely shattered in a single afternoon. King Cetshwayo's warriors, armed with little more than hide shields and iron spears, have just handed the British Empire the most catastrophic defeat it will ever suffer at the hands of an indigenous force. The massacre at Isandlwana sends immediate, terrifying shockwaves all the way back to the halls of power in London, permanently rewriting the brutal arithmetic of colonial warfare and proving, at the cost of a slaughtered army, that brilliant tactical maneuvering can absolutely annihilate modern firepower.